So greetings everyone, a very warm welcome on behalf of the ALNAP events team to this webinar, Are Humanitarians Paying Enough Attention to Learning on the Frontline? I'm now going to hand over to Jennifer Doherty to formally begin the webinar. So over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much. So hello and welcome all of you joining from around the world in your different time zones. I'm Jennifer Doherty, a research fellow from ALNAP, and it's my pleasure to have you with us for this learning event. The aim of this webinar is to start a conversation about the extent to which humanitarian organizations value and support the knowledge of frontline staff, the challenges they face in doing so, and to think through some of the practical solutions. This will be a panel session during which I'll briefly introduce some of the participatory work ALNAP has been doing to support frontline learning as part of our 25th anniversary series, Spotlight on Learning. Then we will discuss key issues arising from that work with colleagues from across the sector. And finally, we will open the floor to your questions and reflections. The panel kindly joining us today includes Amélie Cardon, Deputy Director of Operations for Programs at Solidarités International. Sally Hafez, a Research Associate with the Research People. Mohammed Haib, a Meal Coordinator with Oxfam Somalia. And Mohammed Mujibul Haq Munir, Joint Director of Social Development and Communication at Coast Foundation, Bangladesh. A warm welcome to all of you. We look forward to hearing your thoughts in a few minutes. Before we move to the discussion with the panel, I would like to give you some background to our work on frontline learning and the conversations we'll be having today. Staff working in humanitarian contexts learn every day, especially the staff who work directly to implement and monitor projects in communities, those who are often referred to as frontline staff. They have to problem solve on the spot in complex and evolving contexts, far from the ideals of project proposals. They interact with crisis-affected communities, gaining understandings of people's experiences, needs, and priorities. As such, their skills and knowledge are essential for effective humanitarian action. Yet there are multiple challenges to frontline learning, including, among others, a lack of time, appropriate resources, and sometimes interest from more senior staff, not to mention high turnover. And this matters because if learning doesn't get shared with peers or integrated into future organizational decision-making and project design, this has a detrimental effect on the outcomes of those affected by crisis. Yet typically, time and resources to support learning focuses on the skills of more senior staff and often prioritizes more formal training sessions rather than considering how to share knowledge that's gained through experience. In an effort to work on these challenges, ALNAP started a participatory project in 2020 to develop some resources to support organizations to enable and value frontline learning. We want today to predominantly be about discussion and reflection rather than PowerPoint presentations, but I will just share a couple of slides covering some terms we'll be referring to during this session, and also introducing our new learning resources developed in partnership with some of the panelists. Given this event is framed around learning and sharing knowledge, it's probably useful to define some of those key terms first so we're all thinking about similar things. While there are certainly different definitions for learning and knowledge, one we've used in previous ALNAP work is that learning is the process by which individuals, teams, organizations, and groups of organizations create, transfer, and use knowledge in order to achieve positive change and realize their goals. Learning involves the application and interpretation of information, extending beyond the transfer of knowledge. So that's a very active definition of learning. It has an end goal, and it's a process that takes place over time and goes beyond just acquiring knowledge to interpreting and using it. Knowledge transfer is one piece of that learning puzzle, and we define this in the resources as the process of sharing or disseminating knowledge within an organization or across organizations or communities. So knowledge transfer is an important step on the learning journey and one we focus on within this work. So these are our last two key terms to keep in mind for today. They describe two types of knowledge that we encounter in the sector. First, explicit knowledge is knowledge that is produced as a result of a formal process of sharing learning that can be in a documented form, usually found in reports, manuals, videos, and guidelines. Second, tacit knowledge is the unwritten or undocumented form of knowledge and skills that a person acquires through observation and practical experience. So explicit knowledge is often what we think about with learning through training or studying from books. But tacit knowledge is much more about experience gained through seeing and through action. And we know from other ALNAP work that tacit knowledge tends to be the predominant way that humanitarian actors learn, especially frontline staff. Yet we don't always recognize and value that pathway to learning. Strengthening and sharing this form of tacit knowledge, thereby enabling individuals and organizations to learn from it, were the main aims of this work. I'll take you very briefly through our recent work as a basis for the discussion with the panelists. Within the work stream, we created two practical resource packs for use by humanitarians. The first resource we've created was focused on tacit knowledge. In 2021, ALNAP began working with the research people and a steering group drawn from local organizations in different crisis-affected countries. This resource pack was developed in a participatory, evidence-based manner, using a mapping of gaps in existing approaches and the guidance of this steering group of humanitarian experts from Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, Nigeria, and South Sudan. The members of the steering group also piloted the approach with staff in their own organizations before finalization to ensure the resources were practical. This resource was designed with the aim to support both individual staff at all levels or their organizations to find practical ways to share and use tacit knowledge and integrate it into ways of working, project planning, and decision-making. The resource pack contains a framework to help understand what areas you or your organization can strengthen, and then 5 resources to support you to acquire and share tacit learning, including a toolbox of different ways to share learning. Links to the resources are available in the chat in multiple languages. The second resource we created was focused on just one of the ways of sharing tacit learning included in the toolbox. This approach is called action learning. So very briefly, action learning is a straightforward approach that combines reflection and action, relies on groups coming together to reflect on success and challenges, using a questioning approach to promote deeper reflection and to consider new ideas. Often it's used in a cycle of discussing a challenge, determining an action, trying that action, and then reflecting on the results with the same group of peers, as shown in this basic diagram on the slide. The main purpose of the Action Learning Resource Pack is to provide a very straightforward method that frontline staff can use to stimulate more space for self-reflection and generating knowledge, for problem solving collectively with peers, and also to share their tacit knowledge with other frontline staff. This is particularly important to ensure that if one member of staff leaves an organization, all their great experience doesn't leave with them. This pack was also created in a participatory manner with 26 frontline staff from 11 different organizations, including local, national, and international NGOs who helped us pilot the approach. We also worked in partnership with the research people to do the monitoring and evaluation of the pilots, and also with Action Learning Associates, who delivered the trainings to the participants and offered them support throughout the pilot process. This resource is predominantly designed for frontline staff to use themselves and for their managers. And this resource pack is currently available in Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. You'll find all these links also provided in the chat. So I'm not going to go into more detail now. Instead, I will leave that up to our panelists to dig into these issues further and for you all to add to the conversation. I will, however, leave you with a reflection from one participant in the project who used an action learning approach with her team of frontline staff working in Syria. She said, "When we began to explore the challenges and they started talking about their solutions, I was really surprised that they really had great ideas. Before, they didn't have the floor. They didn't have the chance to talk. And when they did, they came up with ideas that I've never heard about." That highlights both the initial problem that many organizations have when they don't encourage frontline staff to reflect and share their learning, but also the benefits that can come when that opportunity is provided. If you want to know more about other reflections on the process, you can also download our research report that describes some of the things we've discovered about frontline learning from these pilots, called Learning Where It Matters. While this relates to the action learning pilots, we think that the findings are more widely applicable to those interested in strengthening frontline learning. So please also find that link to the study in the chat. So as you can see, many different individuals and organizations contributed to this work stream. Some of them are on the panel today, others are in the audience, while others are busy implementing and monitoring projects as we speak. But all of their inputs were incredibly valuable, so our sincere thanks go to all of them. So before we delve into the panel discussion, I wanted to ask you all to quickly fill in a very short poll so we can get a sense of where you think your organization is on some of these issues. So please fill in the poll that you can see appearing on your screen. There will be 2 short questions. The first one is, how well does your organization prioritize time and resources for frontline staff to learn and strengthen their skills? The options are very well, well, neutral, not well, and not well at all. And so I'll leave you to fill that in for a few moments. Great, I hope enough of you have filled that, and we can move to the next question. How well does your organization listen to the learning and experiences of frontline staff in organizational decision-making? Again, it's the same options from very well to not at all well. And I'll give you a few moments to fill that in. Okay, I hope you've all had time to answer those 2 questions. And we'll close those and we will come back to those responses to that poll in a little while. In the meantime, I would like to move on to our first panelists. So ALNAP's recent work on communicating humanitarian learning noted that many humanitarian actors, and particularly frontline staff, learn best through gaining and sharing tacit knowledge. So we worked with Sally from the research people to explore further the issue of tacit learning for the sector as a starting point to creating the resource pack. Sally, what were the key issues about tacit learning for humanitarians that struck you when you were doing your initial research for the project?
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and lovely being here. One of the most surprising things was how far this concept of tacit learning was practiced. It was very commonly practiced, particularly among frontline humanitarians, but it was not framed as the word tacit learning. So that was one interesting thing to observe. The second thing was their excitement and their interest once they heard that this kind of knowledge, the local knowledge that they have and they've been practicing for years and years, can be finally materialized and can be acknowledged. That kind of acknowledgement gives them like a sense that their views and their opinions can be further acknowledged, and that kind of acknowledgement will be able to contribute to better humanitarian response and humanitarian work. When we're thinking about like the decisions or the learnings that they hold, think about the way they negotiate with the community or with a specific community where they would like to install like a wash station. Many of them showed very good knowledge of all the guidelines, the sphere guidelines, but the way they talk to or negotiate with the community was not written anywhere. It was just the knowledge and learning that they inherited from their continuous work with the communities that they work with. So finally recognizing this and finally realizing that their knowledge matter and exist and there is a name for it and it's not just something in their head was something very empowering for them to see that, yes, it's finally time to recognize our learnings. So that was something very interesting to observe. What was also fascinating for me in the process was being guided by the steering group and going and see how they would like, what kind of learnings matters to them, regardless what we had in mind. We went into this project with an idea about what kind of the toolkit would look like, what kind of resources might be needed, but we were really surprised to see there are a lot of toolkits, a lot of tools, a lot of resources being already used and adapted from the development sector or from other sector. So many of the local organizations had their own communities of practice, they had their own mentorship programs, they had different action learning, some sort of action learning adapted in their work in their organizations, but they wanted some sort of a different thing. They didn't want a humanitarian toolkit, but they wanted something that would bring these different pieces together. And that's what we tried to do. Also, they wanted the kind of like roadmap or a larger framework so they can link the different tools to the organizational practices and the project management. What was also interesting, and we found also from the expert consultation, how the use of the different tools and approaches in tacit learning was depending on the organizational culture, and that was something not captured in many of the tools or existing documents or existing resources about tacit learning. So we wanted to kind of unpack this a little bit and understand from the steering group what that means to them, how their organizational cultures can enable or can strengthen this kind of learning with them, and how this can be done at different levels. So not only on the project level, so they can capture the tacit learning from the projects, but also from the organization and how that would feed to the organization as a wider space. And that's what we spent some time with them to understand how we can best design this with them, and how can we make this to really meet the need of the humanitarian field-based manager and frontline staff. Yeah, it was also fascinating for me how many of the steering group committees tried to even contextualize and tailor this toolkit more. So they translated this to the local language so their frontline local staff can know and can use it, just like what our colleague Munir, and I'm sure he will expand on this, because that was fascinating experience to see how they immediately took the draft and translated it and contextualized it so they can test it properly with the frontline team. They're moving away from the language barrier and giving them more space to be empowered and to translate their tacit learning in their own local context and their own languages and in own words is a very huge thing. So that kind of contextualization of the tool helped us also to understand the feedback, because they provided a different feedback from the senior management. The frontline humanitarian usually have a different perspective and a different way to make sure that these kind of learning and knowledge are properly captured. And that helped us to adapt and kind of reiterate how we will use the toolkit, how to change few sections, make few sections more clear so they can meet the needs of the frontline being the heart of this toolkit.
Thanks so much, Sally. That was really useful to hear more about the process and the iterative nature, but also what you said at the beginning about the importance of acknowledgement and giving the knowledge that frontline staff have a name and recognition, that they could name themselves and be able to recognize it. That's fantastic. So you talked a bit about the committee and how they supported you in this process. So I was wondering, in working with that committee of experts from multiple different countries, what was the most valuable piece of advice you learned from them about supporting tacit learning that helped you in this process?
Oh, thank you. That's a very good question. And I think we learned so much. But it was fascinating how all the time they brought this concept about learning from the community and how this should be the center of our learning and tacit learning approach, how we should be humble in front of our local knowledge, in front of the community, and listen to them, because this is how many of the frontline humanitarians took and built their own knowledge and their own practice. It was fascinating because we were guided by the steering group and the steering group was guided by the community. And that kind of process was very helpful for us to see what the people at the end in the affected communities would like to have, and what what kind of knowledge and learnings did they acquire. They always shared important reflections on how to go and listen to the community, how they ask their teams to go and listen to the community in specific ways, so their frontline team can really understand the communities that they serve and can be better to provide humanitarian assistance. As per that, many were sharing how to ask, they were teaching and working with the staff to ask questions, how they ask the right questions to the communities, and how they can just be humble and sit and listen. So that was very fascinating to see how they always brought this point to our discussions. The way they framed the communities as the custodian of the generational kind of tacit learning was also important. Another brilliant point that always helped us to think why we're also doing this is how the steering group members brought the discussion to realizing and acknowledging tacit learning and its relation to the efforts about decolonization of knowledge and humanitarian action, and how this this discussion was really important for them, because by acknowledging the frontline tacit learning, you're giving the local knowledge more power, and this is, from their opinion, it was a form of decolonizing the knowledge, and that's why they were really keen to contribute to this work and to empower this toolkit and to really use it with their frontline staff, so how it will be a tool to shift the power from who has the knowledge and expertise in humanitarian knowledge. And that's why many of the people, even we consulted outside of the steering group, were really happy to see that the word tacit knowledge is now used to describe generations of tacit learning and tacit knowledge.
Thanks so much, Sally. I think that's really valuable to think about that link between frontline learning and community knowledge and how that fits together, maybe with some of our discussions on accountability to affected populations and also decolonizing knowledge. Thanks so much. So I'm going to move from Sally to Munir, who was one of the members of that steering committee. It'd be great if you have questions for Sally to be putting them in the Q&A box and also upvoting other people's questions as well. So Munir, you were one of the members of that group representing experience from Coast Bangladesh. Can you tell us some of the challenges that your organization has experienced in the past with incorporating the learning of frontline staff into your work?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer. And I would like to pay my gratitude to ALNAP for inviting me to this event. And yes, we have faced some severe challenges in transferring learning and sharing in our organization. I think you know that Coast Foundation is working in Bangladesh with about 1,500 staff, and we have about 500 staff in the Rohingya response only. And we have some tools and techniques to share our learnings among the frontline staff and to get the learning from the frontline staff to the principal office to relocate this learning to other areas or other projects. But we observed that in some cases, using the similar tools, similar techniques, some staff are doing great and some are not doing great. So then we conduct an assessment that there is a problem of sharing the knowledge, because we usually in NGOs and we usually focused on the learnings that is visible. Okay, you have done this practice is very good. Okay, we have done these case studies, we have made these inputs very good. But we realized in some cases that the main challenge was that we could not be focused on to identify the tacit knowledge. And that was our great problem. And even though we conducted some assessments, we organized some events, the result was not that much at the desired level. Then suddenly I came to know about the tacit knowledge from ALNAP project. And then I immediately sit with my MIL team and then with my colleagues in the front line. Then they were also very much agreed that yes, the main challenge was to identify the learning which is not visible, and the tools and techniques how to transfer this invisible or tacit knowledge from one frontline staff to other. That was our big challenge. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mina. That's really useful to think about how to integrate some of these ideas of tacit knowledge and the knowledge that you don't often see explicitly integrated with your meal work as well, and how you did that in such a participatory way with the rest of your organization. Were there particular solutions from the project that you felt worked in your context? And what do you still want to do as an organization to strengthen your approach to an enabling learning environment?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, it was a great help for us for even the whole coast. Now we are now trying to practice it in our Rohingya response program. So we're now implementing about 7 projects there with about 500 staff. And as Sally was mentioning, we have translated the research packages and some questionnaires in our local language, and we have discussed it with our senior management team, and also we have conducted numerous number of meetings and events with our staff about the tacit knowledge. They know about the tacit knowledge now. And now we have started the process to incorporate this tacit knowledge in very seriously in our meal system. Because in the meal system, we have our learning sharing mechanism. So we are now going to incorporate this tacit knowledge system in our meal system, and they are working now. We are going to organize have a online meal system, and tacit knowledge will be a very strong part of course foundation management in terms of learning sharing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Munir. I think it'll be really interesting maybe in the Q&A for people to hear a bit more about how you've been able to do that practically and merge the two with the tacit learning on your online system. But for now, thank you very much. Please do put your questions for Munir into the Q&A box and upvote others as well. So thanks to our first 2 panelists for discussing that area of tacit knowledge. We'll think a bit more about one of the modes for promoting tacit knowledge in the next section. But for now, I wanted to go back to those poll results. So if we can see what your responses were on those. So for the first one, so how well does your organization prioritize time and resources for frontline staff to learn and strengthen their skills? I think we've got quite a bit of clustering around the middle here, although potentially quite a bit more maybe positive than negative looking at this, so showing that some of these conversations are already happening and it's starting to move forward, but still quite a concentration of those that are neutral at 30% and not well at 25%. So certainly more work to be done. But I think interesting to see the 9%. Great, I seem to have got kicked out when the first poll popped off, so we can have the second one.
Yes, I will share the second one now for you, Jen.
So how well does your organization listen to the learning and experience of frontline staff in organizational decision making? So this one, it's quite similar to the last one, maybe slightly lower with fewer at that very well category, but still quite concentrated around the middle and definitely more room for improvement. So maybe we can share later in the session a bit more about ways that people are thinking of doing this, doing it already, or some of those challenges that you're having with it. So thank you. I will try and hang on as we get rid of the second poll and hope I don't disappear again. So every time the poll disappears from my screen, I disappear as well. So I think no more polls. So as I was saying, we were really hoping to have Mohammed Haib from Oxfam, Somalia with us to talk about his experience of the action learning pilots and using this approach with his frontline colleagues. However, he's not been able to join the call at the last moment today. So he was going to speak with you particularly about how action learning fits with the existing monitoring and evaluation processes of organizations. We're still really keen to provide you with some of the reflections from frontline staff themselves. So I'm going to read some of their comments to you that were gathered during the pilot. It's far from ideal, as it would have been much better to hear from Mohammed in his own voice, but at least you can hear some of the words coming from the different participants on these slides that we'll be sharing. So first, people in the pilot seem to enjoy the flexibility of the action learning approach and its use in problem solving as and when it was needed, rather than as set points in a program cycle like more standard M&E. So one participant explained that currently we hold 6 monthly or yearly learning events that bring lots of people together and cover lots of issues. You're trying to learn whilst you're also implementing the action plan. And the action plan is always seen as more important than having an event. So you end up having the event 6 months later and you still have a whole bunch of issues with your program. There are still question marks and no solution. Instead, with action learning, within 30 minutes of the session, I got lots of positive ideas and a quick remedy for the issue outstanding. Normally, I wouldn't have come up with half these ideas in the same time scale. So in terms of time, flexibility, and space, it was really useful. So another picked up on the importance of having opportunities to share challenges and successes with colleagues, where people were bringing their own issues, but also were able to discover useful similarities. Now on the next slide, one of the participants said that it was good because it's not just about my topic that I brought, but also a way of exploring other issues that I might face in the future. Sometimes it helped me to see issues I was already facing and was not really aware of. So when we work together as a group, we're helping each other. And finally, another explained how having regular opportunities to reflect can complement ongoing M&E efforts. So I feel that the methodology we use today is more for HQ to communicate the lessons learned within HQ or to the donor, whereas action learning is a way to make the data on lessons learned operational for our daily activity more at field level, which is the first step for me. And afterwards, it's even easier to just formalize it and send it to coordination to the HQ and to the donor. So those are just a few of the reflections that we had from the different participants, and Mohammed would be able to tell you much more if he was able to join us. But I will mention that these positive remarks aren't to say that the action learning approach was a perfect fit. Some people struggled to find the time to fit the full approach, which included holding several cycles with the same group of people into their busy schedules. Some also found that senior staff were not supportive of them trying the approach during cross-organizational meetings. However, in the face of those challenges, we saw a lot of adaptations to the original approach. Instead of finding dedicated time to do action learning, people integrated a questioning approach in their one-to-one discussions with other staff or into their existing team meetings in a much more ad hoc way. And some said the exposure to the approach made their individual thinking processes more reflective. So to do a full action learning approach with dedicated time and repeated cycles, frontline staff likely needed more time to be set aside for that by senior staff, and the organization would need to buy into using it more systematically. So this isn't always going to be the case, but it was great to see the innovative ways that piloting frontline staff and their managers were able to take the bits that they liked from the approach and adapt it to fit their own organizational contexts. So again, apologies that we missed out on hearing from Mohammed directly, who would have said that much more eloquently, but I hope that it gives you a flavor of the perspectives from frontline staff involved in the project. So now we'll go back to another panelist. So we have Amelie from Solidarités International, who was one of the other organizations involved in the piloting and developing of these resources. The trainer and I really enjoyed engaging with your enthusiastic team during the pilots. So far in the session, we've focused a lot on learning from national organizations or from staff working closely with communities. As someone who works in the headquarters of an international NGO, with projects operating in different countries, in what ways is the knowledge of frontline staff valuable to your work, and what challenges have you experienced tapping into that learning?
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. So I represent the Deputy Direction of Operations, which within SI is essentially the unit that is responsible for technical expertise and program quality. That means that one of our roles is to create the norms, the tools, the approaches that will allow our teams on the ground to implement projects addressing the needs of populations affected by crisis. And so to answer your question, being able to capture the frontline knowledge, is very, very valuable to us, simply because it feeds directly into the learning process that is necessary for us to provide such tools to our teams. It keeps us grounded and it keeps us connected with the communities we work with. It feeds into learning from our mistakes, our experiences, and be better prepared for future interventions. That is true at the local level, but a good amount of that knowledge, even when it comes from different places, can be applied and used across different countries. It can be used to fill the knowledge gap. It can be used to demonstrate the effect of and the impact of our actions. It can be used to inspire and feed innovations, always with this goal of improving the quality of the interventions that we implement. And those results can also be shared externally to improve the quality of humanitarian responses overall. Solidarity International is present within 23 countries, and we have over 2,500 employees working on the ground. So that means essentially that we're, in theory, we have access to a very large amount of frontline knowledge. But tapping into this knowledge comes with many challenges, which you have mentioned. So I'll start maybe just with the nature of what we do. We are an emergency actor. We work in contexts of crisis, in environments that are very dynamic, unstable. That means that we always constantly have to adapt. And there's often very little time to take a step back in a systematic way and share experiences and learn from them. So there's even less time to document this knowledge. And this is also fueled by the lack of resources and tools that help documenting this knowledge. And this is something that ALNAP has tackled through developing the Learning Resource Pack. You also mentioned the issue of high staff turnover. This is very true for international organizations. It's true for international staff, but it's also true for frontline and national workers who may move from one project to another. The projects are very short. They may move from one area to another. They may move from one organization to another. And when they leave, they might leave with the knowledge that they have acquired. All of these are challenges that we try to overcome on a daily basis to make sure that we keep learning and improving the quality of what we do.
Thanks, Emily, for sharing that. It's really useful to hear about the value that you see in that knowledge and the purpose of sharing it between people within your own organization and more broadly, but also those big challenges of people moving both within organizations and between. So aside from the action learning sessions that we worked with you on, what other ways does Solidarités try to support tacit learning exchange among its staff? And do you have plans to strengthen those approaches more?
So one of the things that we ask our teams to implement within each of our countries of operation is to make sure that each country has a learning plan that allows the teams to identify which topics they want to learn and focus on, what formats they can use for the learning exercises, anticipate who will be responsible for those exercises, anticipate the need for dedicated resources, and also anticipate possible connections with all of the monitoring and evaluation activities. Within those plans, there are opportunities to integrate tacit learning. generating and capturing this tacit knowledge is often done through creating space to cater dialogue and through using participatory methods. So we do this through the use of kickoff meetings. We do this through midterm reviews, lesson learned, and best practices workshops, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a number of tools that we have developed and that can be used by our teams. For instance, handover templates that allow us to make sure that when someone leaves, their knowledge stays. We have a number of templates for institutional knowledge building, such as activity sheets. We have recommendation tracking tools. But there's still a long way to go. This can allow us to, bring tacit knowledge into becoming more explicit knowledge. But we do want to go further, and that can be done through, first, by disseminating a culture around learning and tacit learning specifically. This can be done through the support of our meal teams, but there's also a need for all teams to feel and recognize their role into recognizing tacit knowledge and valuing this knowledge for the learning that it can bring. We have seen across different countries that some teams take the initiative to share and bring out this knowledge. In the Middle East, for example, we have our teams that have come together and created their own community of practice. This is something that HQ would like to support to make sure that we make available platforms that allow for a more horizontal learning, and that is not just accessible to senior staff, but all frontline workers. And for all the future tools that we are meant to develop over the next few months and years, also find ways in which tacit learning, again, is taken into consideration and can be valued. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. I think some of the things that you picked up on there definitely reflect some of the conversations that the participants were having about the need for not just M&E staff to be involved in this sort of learning and having those connections much more with program staff who are, having these daily interactions. Another point you mentioned sounded interesting about some of these learning practices like community of practice building up organically and how to encourage that and share that learning across different countries as well. So thanks so much, Emily, and hopefully we can hear more from you in the Q&A as well. So before we move to that Q&A, we'd like to involve you all a bit more in reflection on these issues. And I can see that there's quite a lot of discussion happening in the chat as well. It'd be great if we can capture some of these thoughts. So we're going to be looking at a Miro board now, and you should see the link appearing in the chat as well. So it's shared on screen, but you should be able to access that through a link. And when you get that, there are 3 questions on the board that we'd like you to consider and add your own answers to using sticky notes. So the 3 questions that we have dig into some of those things we were discussing at the beginning in the poll. So what challenges do you or does your organization face with supporting frontline learning? What methods are you or your organization already using to support and share the learning of frontline staff? And what do you or does your organization need to strengthen this area further? So you can write your contribution in a post-it note on the Miro board in 2 ways. So by double-clicking on any of the empty post-it notes already available on the board, or by adding a new post-it note. So you can do that by clicking on the corresponding icon on the toolbar, and after selecting a color for it, you'll be able to place a post-it anywhere on the board by clicking on the desired area. So we'll give you around 5 minutes to provide some responses, and I can already see people are being busy on that. We'll also keep this open to the end of today's session so we can capture your thoughts throughout. So it's great to see some answers appearing. If anyone is struggling to create post-it notes or to move around that board, you can also post your answers in the chat, and my colleague Molly will help transfer it to the Miro board. Please, if you're doing that, indicate which number of question you're answering so she can put it in the right place. We'll also be saving that chat, so if there are too many to move over, we'll still have them for later and we can combine it. I'll give you a few moments to concentrate on that. So please feel free to answer any of those questions or just focus on the one that you think is most important for you. And if you've finished writing your own post-its, then please do take a look at what other people have written as well. I can see Joseph is asking for the link to the board in the chat. Molly, can you post that again to make sure everybody can see it? I know it was further up. Brilliant. Thank you, Debbie. I'll just give you about another minute to finish that off. You can see there's certainly a lot coming up on the first one in terms of challenges, but also a good amount in terms of some of the methods that are already ongoing. So it'll be really interesting to dig more into some of those. And if you have finished, then please do think about your questions for the panel and add them to the Q&A box, or take a look at any of the existing ones and upvote those that you would like to hear answered. Great. I think we'll wrap up the Miro board for the moment, but please feel free to keep adding any reflections that you have. So we're not going to spend a long time focusing on those responses individually now, as we want to have time for Q&A, but this will be incredibly useful for us to review after the session and to help continue the conversation on these ideas with you. So we'll be taking a good look at that and doing some synthesis of it when we finish. But for now, let's move to the Q&A. I'm excited to see some of the questions that you have for the panelists. There are some there already. Please feel free to add some more. And if you'd like to direct your question to a particular panelist member, please write their name as well so we can help direct that. I think the first question I can see at the top here is, can you describe some tools that worked for you to share the learning? For example, like short videos to be shared in WhatsApp groups, with the assumption that it's easier to share, the better. So what good steps for sharing about that emerged? So I think this one came in earlier, so it's probably for Sally and Munir. So first of Sally and then Munir, if you have any questions or thoughts on this one, it'd be great. I'll pass to Sally first.
Thank you. Indeed, when we had a discussion with the frontline humanitarians, they shared that informal or a small scale type of community of practice was the most suitable form for them to share their reflections, because it enables them to kind of focus all their learnings and ideas on one specific topic. For example, community of practice in WASH. So they go and try to understand how, for example, the community perceive a specific practice or a specific service, or what would be the best way to communicate with the community on this topic. So from a usability perspective, that was for many frontline humanitarian was a very helpful tool to reflect, but also to kind of share this reflection to be in a structured way, in a specific topic in the area that they work in, not just a regular, like a bunch of random ideas and random reflections. So that was quite helpful. The use of different digital tools and how this kind of community of practice can be translated to a digital platform like a WhatsApp group was also mentioned by a lot of frontline humanitarians, and its use and how it's organized or moderated or unmoderated, and the frequency of nudging the participants were all different from one organization to the other. But that was quite interesting way how they used it.
Thanks so much, Sally. Munir, do you have some suggestions as well of how you've done this?
Yeah, yes. I would like to share my experience, in fact, that when we are trying to identify the tools and techniques to share the learning, the tacit learning, then we have found that we just allow people, some identified, some people who have, we believe that he has the great learning within themselves. Then we allowed people, okay, go ahead, go with them or her. Just observe how he is doing his job, or she is doing her job. And we have found a very good result from this, just observing others who believe that he or she has the learning, and conducting the stories of our staff also, because we mainly worked with the sharing learning from the frontline staff. That is why I am talking mainly about our frontline staff learning sharing. Then we have got a very good result using these techniques, just collecting the stories and observe how he or she is doing. And also we increase the frequency of staff meeting, formal or informal. And from the meetings, we have also got ideas of learning and sharing techniques. Thank you.
Thanks, Munir, for some of those insights and reflections to how you're doing things in Coast. There's a question here that's specifically for Amelie. So how did you turn around the challenges of little time to step back, reflect, and document the knowledge? And how did the new approach help to create that space and time? It does sound like a culture change.
Yes, so unfortunately, I don't think we can say that we've turned around that issue. It's still very present, especially when we are working within that phase of emergency. And this is something that the teams who have worked on piloting the action learning have actually reported, that the approach is very useful, yet finding the time to meet on a regular basis, to bring the teams together, meet on a regular basis, sharing that that experience is a real challenge because we're focused on the implementation of the interventions, which oftentimes are life-saving interventions, right? So there's a real issue around it, but you do talk about a culture change, and I think a lot comes with that. We need to find a way to adapt those approaches to what is actually realistic in terms of time, but we need to value this knowledge and those moments, and that is a culture change in itself. I think overall, from what I've observed, that the humanitarian sector is not always very keen on bringing learning and making learning a priority. A lot of staff really see this as extra, and this is something that we need to change, and we need to sensitize our teams on how useful all of this knowledge is, and really when we talk about lessons learned, best practices, being able to implement actions, projects that properly address the needs of the populations we work with, this should be obvious, right? So this is something that we haven't found the right solution as Solidarité International, but this is something that we plan to be working around over the next few years to make sure that even if those tools and approaches cannot be fully used on a daily basis, but that there's still a systematic inclusion of frontline learning in the way that we talk to each other, listen to each other, and change the way we work.
Thanks so much for that answer, Amelie. We have a similar question, which is more about how do you measure those changes in culture, or how the kind of learning environment is changing? Be interested to know if, Munir, you have any reflections on how you've measured change in the environment for learning and culture within your organization.
Yes, I can give you an example of how we have got the measurement that the changes has been happened. For example, we are implementing a project or program with some self-reliant groups of our program participants. Some groups are doing very well, some groups are lag behind. Then we try to identify what are the best practices of the groups are doing good. We identified some skills of the leadership that is not visible, but they have some skills that is helping these groups to do well. And then we try to have some visits, exchange, learning visit of the leadership with the other groups. After 2 or 3 months, we have very specific tools to measure their improvement. For example, the monthly savings, monthly income, their group business income, and their participation in different demand mediation schemes. And we have identified that against all these indicators, if you compare to the previous 3 months, they're doing well. So this was our measurement techniques that or experience that the changes were there, using the tacit knowledge techniques. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Munir. That's a useful reflection. We still have about 10 minutes of the Q&A left, so please do add any additional questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on some that have come up in the chat as well. I think there's one that Sally might be able to answer based on her experience in developing the resources for tacit learning. So one from Annabelle saying that she's interested in hearing about any experiences of using blended learning, for example, combination of face-to-face and online learning, to share or strengthen frontline workers' knowledge and experience. So Sally, can I put that one to you?
Yes, absolutely. So the way we defined blended learning was a little different from the way Annabelle defined it. It was more blended learning for us was how to combine tacit learning with explicit learning. But if you would like to have more good practices on how you use like online learning and face-to-face learning, obviously the frontline humanitarian organizations used multiple ways. An example like the one I just mentioned about communities of practices that kind of have another digital arm so that people would meet and face-to-face, but also they would be having further discussions or sharing resources or expanding on the discussions that they have over WhatsApp group or any digital platform. The same was also done with mentoring, especially with the middle management or project manager who has been the organization would like to strengthen their capacities and strengthen the way they manage specific things or tackle specific issues or take specific decisions. So many of them offered a blended mentorship. And I think Sidanshu, our steering group member from India, shared a very good example how when he goes to visit his team members in different areas, he started this kind of mentorship program, but when they are apart or when he goes back to Delhi, he continued this kind of mentorship, but it will be blended, it will be remotely as well, done over Zoom. Many have been identifying also team retreats as a way to identify this tacit learnings and kind of bring all the ideas that wouldn't usually emerge in the regular meetings because people are in a different settings and they have different questions and the type of reflections that they are asked to do is quite different. And some of these retreats has been also done blended, especially for large teams that have remote team members and all of that. So there have been a couple of good experiences, but I think what we need maybe to ask ourselves is how far all the staff have equal opportunity to participate digitally, especially the frontline staff. The internet connectivity, some of the gadgets that they use. Many organizations still don't give, for example, laptops or tablets to their, for example, community health workers or community mobilizing teams. So their ability also to contribute to that discussion might be something that we should consider.
Great, thanks so much, Sally. And I'll just mention in the resource pack within the tools at the end, there's a table which splits things out into keeping knowledge in tacit form and documenting it or having a blended version, which might be of interest. Thanks so much. So there are two additional questions here, and I think both of them are more for kind of the implementing organizations rather than Sally. So I'll put these to Amelie and Munir. I'll raise them both and you can pick which points that you want to pick on particularly. So the first one is that a lot of organizations claim to use adaptive management, which can rely on both types of learning. Have the panelists had any experience with best practices that fortify adaptive management with special attention to utilizing reflection and tacit learning? The second one is any advice to get organizational buy-in to ensuring that learning and change extends beyond meal and into program development and implementation. There's definitely a lot of learning by program teams, and this is surely incorporated, but formal learning processes are often prioritized by meal and neglected programmatically with a disconnect between the two. So I'll put both those questions to you. I'll go to Amelie first and then Munir, and you can pick out which responses you'd like to give.
Thanks, Jennifer. So maybe I'll start with the second question around extending the responsibility on learning from NEEL teams to program teams. This is a real, it's a real challenge. The truth of the matter is that the MEAL teams, especially when it comes to learning, have a role of putting together a framework supporting program teams in developing methodologies and approaches that will bring out this knowledge and the learning. Yet the program teams are very much the ones who have this knowledge and are responsible to recognize it, highlight it, and use it. And yet what we see is on the ground really is that when we have the chance to have program teams and meal teams, all those responsibilities, yes, go and fall to the meal teams. Within Solidarité International, this is something that we try to tackle by specifying as soon as you know, a new team member comes in, what the roles of the program and the meal teams are, and making sure that all of the learning processes do engage the program teams, and that the program teams can be a driving force in implementing the learning exercises with the support of the meal teams, but making sure that really the program teams and the frontline workers are at the center of these exercises and these dynamics. It's a challenge, and it's something that we have been working on for many years and that we keep working on. Yet it's interesting to see that this is an issue that we find when there are program teams and meal teams, yet when we only have program teams, because sometimes the resources are too little to afford, if I may say, having meal teams, then systematically all of those responsibilities fall onto the program teams uniquely, and the program teams then will not go against it. It's obvious, it makes sense that the program teams have this role of using knowledge and being engaged into these learning exercises to improve the quality of what we do. So it's interesting to see that at the same time, you know, when there's no resources, then it's obvious the program teams are going to go ahead and do it. Yet when there are meal teams, sometimes, yeah, there's sort of like a total divide that happens, and it can be tricky to bring that back together. We try to tackle this as well by making sure, again, that systematically, every time there's an exercise that has to be done around learning, the teams are brought together, and that we can sort of like stimulate a feel of, you know, we work in this together, and we use the meal teams to really help program teams to frame their thinking and to find solutions to specific issues together. But yes, this has been an issue, and this is something that we need to keep working on.
Thanks so much, Amelie. I think we'll pass to Munir here for the final word before we have to wrap up. So thank you.
Thank you, and Jennifer. I was in fact intended to reply to the same question my colleague identified. Anyway, by the terms adaptive management in Coast Foundation, we believe that yes, we are very much on the way of adapting management, because we believe that adaptive management is taking decision based on the new learning. And Coast, we believe that we have a learning environment, and we are practicing and taking both types of learning, both explicit and tacit learning, and we're also based on the decision. There are so many examples that once we have started programs and projects, but after 1 year, when we ought to revise our next year planning, that we have got some very serious and effective learning, and then we redesign the projects and programs. And even though it is a very tough decision in our country, because in Bangladesh, if you want to implement any projects funded by any donor, you have to get the approval from the government, and if you want to change it, once again you need to get a second-time approval, which is very time consuming. But we are doing this, and also in many cases we need to negotiate with the donors, because they have also designed a program, and in some cases many donors are not that much flexible to change. But in Coast Foundation, we believe that once after 1 year we have got a new learning, and which is very much effective to ensure the sustainability of the project outcome, we definitely go for revise and to change it. So this is in this way we are also going on in the adaptive management. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Munir. That's a really useful inflection, and interesting to hear some of the challenges in linking that tacit learning into actually creating change, and some of the bottlenecks on different levels. So That's all we have time for today in terms of the Q&A, but hopefully we continue having this discussion and moving it forwards. I'd like to thank everyone for their inputs and ideas on the Miro board that we will be following up with. And also thanks to the panel for sharing their experiences. And apologies that Mohammed was unable to join us and we couldn't hear his reflections directly as a member of frontline staff participating in those pilots from Oxfam, Somalia. But I hope that some of those participant quotes were a useful illustration of some of their perspectives. So today we wanted to share the resources and research study that we've developed that we hope you'll find useful, and we'd welcome your feedback if you do put them into practice. And as mentioned, links to the resources in different languages were placed in the chat. Please keep your eyes out for some blogs on this topic, including ones written by Munir, Mohammed, and other colleagues involved in the project. So ultimately today, we wanted to start a conversation within the sector about frontline learning and thinking about how these important sources of knowledge can be supported for the benefit of individual staff, organizations, and for more effective programming for crisis-affected populations. So we welcome continued engagement on the issue. Thanks again to all the panelists and everybody else who's contributed to the discussion in the Miro board and in the chat. And let's keep that discussion going on beyond today. As a first step to keeping it moving, we have a link to feedback for a form for that in the chat. Please do fill it in to let us know what you think about the issues that were discussed today and also how to improve our future webinars. I could see some important suggestions around interactivity that would be really useful to capture on there as well. So any reflections in terms of the content and also the format. So thanks again, everyone, for your time and your inputs. Goodbye and take care.